Well, actually, this is the third day of a very intensive conference, and we have a great keynote speech by Kristina Skierka. Kristina has been traveling over the ocean and over the equator, so a big thanks for her. She's the campaign leader of Power for All, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. Should I use this?
Yes, use that one.
This one up here. Oh, sorry. I'm supposed to use this. Good morning. Thank you, Carlos. When Carlos invited me here, he had suggested I come up with something exciting and invigorating for all of you people interested in designing for sustainability. So just by a show of hands, can I see how many people are designers in the room? Oh gosh, it's actually everybody. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm not a designer and I'm not an academic, but what I am is an activist. And I'm here today to talk to you about Power for All, which will hopefully create some additional excitement around the work that you're doing, and hopefully show that the work you do is so important and part of a much bigger, more powerful coalition in the world than maybe even you knew. So let me spend just a few minutes, if I could, telling you about Power for All and our ideas and our vision, and then the things that are really working from a policy perspective and even from a business perspective. We should have some time for questions at the end, I believe. Carlos, what time did you want me to wrap up today? Is it a quarter after, or what do you think? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I just don't want you guys to start your day off track. But just a little bit first about Power for All. So Power for All is a global campaign that's focused on accelerating universal energy access. And we do that by really trying to emphasize the importance of decentralized renewable energy. So these solutions, which include microhydro, mini-grids, solar home systems, they're all really about getting that element of urgency integrated into the way that we're addressing the future of energy poverty and its alleviation. So just a little bit, the campaign itself was birthed from the industry. We're a powerful coalition of over 100 companies and civil society organizations, all united in the belief that we have to act quickly, that urgency is one of the critical elements that's been missing from the conversation around universal energy access. And while I'm quite sure that there's already been a number of discussions today about energy, I hope you'll indulge me for a few minutes just to give you the context about why we do the things that we do. And to that note, I do want to just let you know that there is a happy ending to this. We'll talk about the sort of challenges facing us, but there are things, there are policy instruments, there are business models that can really help accelerate the change that we need to see in the world. So energy itself, this is why our campaign does what it does, and while so many of us are focused on design for this world and at this conference, and we all know that power is fundamental to human and economic development. It's not actually that it solves problems for people, but it really creates the opportunity for people to solve problems for themselves. So it's energy, as we know, that actually empowers people to get engaged in their own development, to use the internet, to work after dark, to do all these sorts of things that really help advance civilization. And there is actually a very strong correlation between Human Development Index and energy. And I would think that most folks in the room understand the Human Development Index, but just in brief, it really is the sort of aggregated look at well-being. So it includes things like education, quality of living, etc. And the great news is that when you look at a country's per capita electricity consumption, you begin to see some very interesting patterns emerge. And importantly, what we see is that a little electricity goes a long way. And when annual energy consumption rises from 0 to just a few thousand kilowatt hours per capita, we do see a very incredible jump in correlated Human Development Index scores. And it doesn't take that much to drive a really big change, which is part of the focus of Power for All. And it's really about just getting those first kilowatts into people's lives, and you begin to see a really significant change. And just as individual lives and entire villages can be changed with access to clean energy, the impacts are also really evident when we're looking at the correlation between economic growth and entire countries. So we see that increases in consumption are strongly correlated, again, with dramatic increases in the advancement of societies. And in fact, according to a recent study that was published by the World Bank, we can see that there are increases in income by 38% once we get into rural electrification. And so with the universal energy to access as so important to the goals of the 21st century, it's become one of the most important factors enabling individuals, as we know. And so it makes perfect sense that the UN started with the Year of Sustainable Energy for All, and then we had a decade, and now we actually have Sustainable Energy for All becoming its own independent NGO. But yet at the same time, we're in a situation where more than 1 billion people are still prevented from accessing all the benefits that come from energy access, the productivity, the health benefits, etc. And this is at the same time the entire global community is committed to achieving SDG 7. So here we are into 1 year of our global goals framework, and what does the future of energy access look like at our current approach? Well, it's a little bit bleak. In fact, the Overseas Development Institute, a partner of Power for All and a UK-based independent think tank, did this analysis of what we think the future of energy access looks like if we continue with business as usual. And we have to ask ourselves, why is this SDG 7, which is so important to all the SDGs, getting a D by the Overseas Development Institute in terms of its success so far and our trajectory for success? Well, at Power for All, we think it's because we're looking at solving the problem the wrong way. I believe that there's probably some exceptions in the room to that with design thinking involved. But for the most part, there's still this established modality that thinks that it's acceptable to wait 20 years to achieve universal energy access and waste an entire generation's worth of potential. So we think there's a better, faster way. And in order to get to that better, faster way, it starts with really understanding the nature of demand. And so starting with the beginning, how is it that decentralized renewable energy can really accelerate the timeline? And so we have to remember that even though the experts say that we're talking about 1,000 terawatts of energy, those aggregate numbers really mask the critical factors about the kind of solutions that we, as part of the design community, academic world, and business world, should be creating. And so we have to really think about aligning the right kind of supply with what the demand actually is. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with these statistics, that 85% of those without universal energy access live in rural parts of emerging markets. And even with population growth, we're not actually expected to see much change with current efforts in that sort of net number of energy, people without energy access. And so those locations where people live often means that people have to go to extremes, which I'm sure you're quite aware of. But the lack of supply forces us to do things that are dangerous, expensive, and unsustainable. And these extremes often include walking many, many miles, several hours to just charge phones. They're expensive, wasting money that could otherwise be reinvested in their lives because they're not using a renewable source, and unsustainable. And these default approaches to satisfy energy demand, I think by anybody's calculation, would be seen as a failure. They're poisonous, expensive, hazardous, kerosene, charcoal, diesel, and that's really where the opportunity for the design community comes in. At the same time, billions remain without a supply of reasonable and safe energy. What we're actually looking at is a situation that's not going to solve itself. A historic shift happened recently in terms of energy demand, and for the first time in modern history, developing countries actually passed the OECD countries in terms of energy use. And we're just beginning to understand what the implications of this are for the future. So over the course of the next 15 years, the expectation is that non-OECD countries will account for 70% of the population growth and 90% of the energy demand growth. So it's countries like India and continents like Africa that really are the center of the future of energy demand. And these countries, as you know, have much less existing infrastructure and are home to the majority of those without energy access. and some of the most challenging regions to supply energy to. And on the topic of supply, we've all discussed universal energy access isn't just a good intention, but it's actually an economic imperative. And so it's not a matter of if we figure out a way to get energy to everybody who wants it and deserves it, but it's how that's really important. And because the how is so important, we absolutely should be looking at every single opportunity, and that includes really assessing fossil fuels and see if they're the right solution. That also means we should look at centralized power plants and just make a real cost-benefit assessment to see what the solution is. So when we look at fossil fuels, there's a lot of, pluses to this system. It's a known distribution networks, existing customer base from a business perspective. But unfortunately, this is often the result. This is a picture of Beijing's skyline. They chose to electrify their country largely by fossil fuels, and we all know what the ills are associated with fossil fuels. It's asthma, lung cancer, premature death, etc. But in addition, when we're looking at coal-fired power plants and their ability to potentially resolve this topic of energy access, we have to really look at the impacts of the greenhouse gas emissions. And we're in a situation there when anyone who assesses from a cost-benefit point of view the default approaches, we're just not simply able to scale in any clean or healthy or even fast way. So setting aside the fuel for a second, decentralized power also requires transmission grids and distribution systems. And these are great solutions for short distance, dense population areas. But again, remembering the energy impoverished are living largely in rural areas, that's really the issue. And that's where we have to look at the solution. So if we know that our focus is really a long distance, low density area, we also need to understand how energy is actually used in these areas. And just as important as the economics is understanding that for most of those without energy access, life is really used and lived on a day-to-day basis. So, cell phone minutes, food, fuel, etc., often is purchased day by day. And so flexibility is a very important part of whatever energy solution we come up with and focus on. And so what happens then when consumers, who basically have one option right now, are already paying outrageous sums for these poor solutions that are hazardous and poisonous, what happens when they're given a choice of energy that's designed by people like you in the room, that's clean, safe, and also provides a long-term return on investment? Well, it's a revolution. It's important to remember that we are actually on the verge of a revolution in the way that power is generated, used, and paid for. And I will say, having worked with a number of these customers over the years, that, thank you, not distracting at all, that they want to be active participants in creating their own energy access. I mean, many people are really sick and tired of waiting for a grid that never comes, and then when it does, it's very poor, inefficient, unreliable energy in and of itself. And so there's really a whole incredible opportunity waiting for us to serve these people, and that's a whole range of design opportunity and business models for us to work with. And it's without this world that we're talking about, without an established method of energy delivery and an entrenched system where the opportunity lies. So it's really a blank slate for us to reinvent how energy is used. This business as usual approach that's been slowing us down and telling us we have to wait 20 years to achieve universal energy access has to be challenged. And we're at a point now where we've seen such incredible cost reductions in all the component parts necessary for basic Tier 1, Tier 2, and even Tier 3 energy access. And at the same time, batteries, LEDs, and prices for PV have all declined dramatically. We've seen an incredible efficiency. And I'm sure for the designers in the room, which is pretty much all of you, you can see what we're working at. There's a convergence of factors that's making a whole new future possible, which is incredibly exciting. At the same time, we've got battery density rising, LEDs performance, etc. The great news is that we're at a time in history where we can actually make use of the cell phone analogy that so many of us talk about. because there's no existing infrastructure, and because this sector, the decentralized renewable energy sector, has many of the same competitive advantages as cell phones, so inexpensive hardware, the ability to pay in bite-size amounts or on credit, and the ability to have competition to further lower prices, there's really an incredible potential here. And again, just to extend the cell phone analogy, when you look ahead, what we've got here is the former, what we would call a hockey stick in some circles, of cell phones. And in 2000, cell phones were about the same penetration in sub-Saharan Africa as this sector, the decentralized renewable energy sector, is today. So in about 1998, cell phone penetration was right around 2 or 3%. And today, there's over 650 million mobile phone subscriptions in sub-Saharan Africa, and most of that growth happened over 10 years. And because we have many of the same advantages, we think instead of settling for this current predicted electrification rate for emerging markets, that this could in fact be the curve of universal energy access. So these are exciting times, and in fact, an important thing to keep in mind is this is already a thriving market, and we are seeing the growth rates that we need to see to have that same hockey stick for decentralized renewables. In this graph, you see an example of a little known fact that already our sector, decentralized renewable energy, from mini grids to solar home systems, is already delivering energy to as many, if not more, customers as many of the largest global utilities in the world. That is something you can bank on. And the good news is that these products aren't just looking at incredible growth, but it's also faster growth. So it's not just that decentralized renewables are the right thing to do because they're clean, safe, and affordable, but in fact it's a better solution because it's faster. So unlike the 5 to 10 year process for building and siting a traditional power plant, decentralized renewable energy is available now, and it's affordable now and easily and readily deployed. So by activating this market, which I'll talk about in a second, and that's really the focus of the Power for All campaign, we actually believe that we could deliver energy to all of those in need in the course of 10 years, not 20, and for a fraction of the cost. Just to be clear, I want to make sure that all of you designers in the room understand the opportunity here. It's 10% of the cost that is currently predicted to achieve this goal, and in half the time. And that's where design comes in. So Power for All believes that there is a better way and that you're part of it, and that by assessing the nature and location of demand and understanding how to best supply, as we've already done this morning, that we can achieve universal energy access before 2030. You know, the only question for us in the room is, will we? Will we do the things we need to do? And we think that if we rethink our approach, then we will be able to do this. And it starts with ending business as usual approaches. Really, it's the historical approaches to energy access that are causing the problems. It's slow, it's cumbersome, it's expensive. And unfortunately for the sector right now, we're still struggling trying to find our way. In terms of forging a path, we sort of sit in between traditional industry, mini grids might be regulated by like light industry in a given country, and solar home systems, the kind that the sector sells, are almost more akin to a fast-moving consumer good. And then when it comes to electronic waste, our sector sort of fits in this sort of electronics area, but we don't actually, we're really having to carve out a path for ourselves in countries, and I think that's the important message to take away from this. So when we talk about next era development, we have to get out of this old model of thinking. We don't have time to build a bunch of centralized plants and continue to extend transmission. But what we have is the opportunity to encourage on-site local demand where consumers can choose how much energy they want and pay for it on demand and achieve their own energy access within 1 to 3 months. Now, there's a whole bunch of interesting ideas about how to do this, and of course there's been a ton of study on what policies work. And just last night I was Googling national policies to accelerate universal energy access, and over 1 million things came back in Google. So I think we need a little sifting, sorting, and prioritizing about what really works. And so for the first time, Power for All, and I'm not the academic, I have a research director that sits at the University of California, Berkeley, and works with students there. But we are doing the first correlation to understand, using regression analysis, about indicators of market growth, which have to do with number of companies or connections in some cases, aligned with the countries that have made the most progress in the market. And so in looking at this is what we see. So these are the 5 big impact countries when it comes to growth in the market. And that's Kenya up top, followed by Ethiopia, Tanzania, then Bangladesh and India. And what we've listed here are the numbers, best we can figure of them, of solar home systems, as well as mini-grid companies. And so right now, the biggest challenge for our sector, and as academics and designers, I'm sure you'll understand the need for data, is that we don't have enough data about our sector and what's working. So we've got some initial analyses. I'm not going to share it all today. My PR director said don't give away the whole farm because we're going to be releasing our paper in about 6 weeks and we'd like you all to tune back in. But what we have is the ability to make some estimates and assumptions. So using something called Climate Scope, which you may or may not be familiar with, it is an index that was developed by the UK government, Power Africa, and BNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, to look at indicators of investability of different countries. And they asked a series of questions related to what we call off-grid in some arenas, but we like to refer to as decentralized renewable energy. And so we looked at a number of policy indicators, and I'm not going to share them all with you today, but I just want to give you a flavor of some of the findings. So when we look at policy barriers, there's an inventory of different kinds of policies more on the regulatory side, including tax incentives that can make a difference. We also looked at elements around the decentralized framework, or having some sort of established protocols for addressing rural development. And some of those include mini-grid licensing, having a dedicated regulator who focuses just on this sector, and having a strong emphasis on quality standards. And then lastly, having energy access policies. And that can include having a rural electrification agency and a dedicated budget, a clean energy plan of some sort, and also access targets. And among the things that we found is that there's a very strong correlation between market growth indicators and these elements. And in particular, some of the most important things that always show up is the importance of having a clear market signal for the market to respond to in terms of specific targets for universal energy access and carve-outs for decentralized renewable energy. So some of these examples of policy best practices in these leading performer countries include what you see on the screen. So it's having a national energy policy, it's having VAT removed and import tariff removed. So that's one of the biggest changes that countries can make. But it's also having other things in place as well, including investment plans and including access to finance and MFIs that can support this sector. Again, this is just a little taste to wet your whistle, and hopefully you'll tune back in about 6 weeks when we release our full paper. But how this all adds up is in a call to action, and that again is what Power for All is all about. You know, I've shown you hopefully enough evidence that you feel emboldened about the role you can play in accelerating universal energy access. We need more companies, we need more products, but they all need to be high quality products that can meet the needs of the customers at a price that they can afford. We know it's possible and it's happening. And so by working to really unify the sector, share information like this, and inspire people like those in the rooms today, that's the focus of Power for All. Our theory of change is pretty simple. This is a pretty simple approach to what campaigning does. We believe that decentralized renewable energy needs to be legitimized. That's through putting data together like we're doing now, but it also means that in convenings like this, we start to see real support and echoing of the power of what this sector can do. Importantly, we have to challenge the existing mindset, which says that it's going to take originally $700 billion and now $1 trillion to achieve universal energy access. Because by the calculations of what our low-cost products can deliver, it can happen faster and cheaper. So in doing those two things, the important thing is to believe ourselves and to convince other people that we can see a new future, and that will create the political will necessary that we need in nations and countries to help create those conditions for success for this sector. And so Power for All really focuses on this ecosystem approach. We try to really focus on large sources of capital as well as big policy levers that can be pulled to make a difference. So we've got a whole focus ourselves on addressing MDBs in the finance community or multilateral development banks, as well as fine-tuning what those policies are that are most important for governments to have a place if they suffer from energy poverty, and helping also attract that market to the sector itself. So that includes enrolling NGOs and CSOs in the work and the, I guess, sort of storyline and narrative shifts, as well as getting companies engaged and creating the environment they need to succeed. So we do that through a couple of different approaches, and one is really around awareness. That's all the things you would think about when it comes to awareness. It's evidence curation. It's pulling together proof and storylines that really make a difference, and not just at the global level, but at the national level. And in fact, when we've been working at the national level on media, one of our strong efforts has been to fundamentally alter what we call the share of voice of decentralized renewables versus traditional grid-based energy. And what we've seen is an incredible shift. We've seen a media who's really interested and wants to learn and share the message. And in particular in Sierra Leone, for example, one of our focus countries, we've seen a shift in terms of what we used to call column inches in media coverage by 26 times what it used to be. So if we can just do more of that work, which you can also help with, of just getting equal share of knowledge, that will help move things along. From the advocacy perspective, this is both something we do at a national level and a global level. And so that really is challenging conventional wisdom and frameworks that really encourage overinvestment in traditional ways of generating energy that's expensive and slow and doesn't usually reach the population without energy. And develop champions within these institutions and influence them from the outside as well. And then lastly, this idea of activation and being involved in target countries on the ground with local campaign managers. So right now our focus countries include 4 countries in Africa as well as India, and it's just been amazing to see what happens when you organize but really focus on in situ movements, getting people from the regions themselves suffering from energy poverty to take on these changes. This is an example of the incredible breadth and depth of media coverage that we've accumulated in a short amount of time for this sector, including a couple of different spotlights on CNBC Africa, which is essential because it also helps target those national policymakers that can help accelerate the sector. And then finally, here's just a couple of examples of some of our strategies in target countries. You'll see the flags there of Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. And in all cases, it's really critical to have a renewable energy association to help establish that collective voice, and then to understand and track policy developments that either can help or hinder development of the market. And as an example of some of our global work that we do, it's a focus on calls to action. And those calls to action, in this case, the last one we did was focused on multilateral development banks, create a platform for activism of a broad range of actors, and also really seek to move and change the thinking and behavior at these big institutions. So, on the theme of calls to action, there's something we all can do, so listen up because here it comes. If you're in the decentralized renewable sector, which includes pretty much everybody in this room who's interested in either systems design or product design, we all need to take a stand for Power for All. We have to figure out a way to work together to ensure quality. There's nothing that'll poison these markets faster than poor quality products. We also have to insist on affordability, and that can range from increasing, benefits of cost efficiencies and production efficiencies to coming up with new and creative ways that people can pay for using the amount of energy they want at the time they want. We also have to collaborate. That's something that we're encouraging more and more because we have to show our power in numbers that can actually deliver Power for All. And it's important for this sector in particular that we band together and do that frequently, often, and loudly. There's nobody else that's clamoring for urgency the same way this sector is. And we've earned our halo, but we are outspent and outorganized in many cases by existing modes of energy delivery, and we need to take that head on. You've already heard a little bit about what we're calling for in terms of public sector and government engagement. And it's pretty straightforward, but it does include working with the private sector. In the countries that we've operated in, we've seen a real need to change the way that policy is created. So we're really trying to establish and develop stakeholder-led policy development so that those who are expected to deliver on the energy access targets actually have a voice in how that's done. It's also about leveling the playing field and getting rid of unfair incentives that often penalize solar and support existing fossil fuel approaches. And finally, this whole idea that we talked about earlier, that having a clear market signal through targets and energy policy is essential. And then when it comes to foundations and donors, it's really important that all of the sort of giving in the space focus on market building and not giveaways. For this sector to be successful and for energy poverty to be permanently alleviated, we really have to build sustainable markets. We have to work together to grow awareness, and in particular, we need sustained commitment to this space. We are in a beginning stages of a revolution, and companies need support, and they need a little bit of patience to figure out their business models, and the results will speak for themselves. And then when it comes to investors and lenders, the big money guys who are critical here, we just need financing. It's a range of colors of money, as we often talk about it. But we need financing for manufacturing, for distribution, for consumer payments, as well for impact, ROI, and data. I can't emphasize enough, especially with academics in the room, how deeply we need clear market intelligence and data so that we can actually track what's working and what's not working in a more systematized ways across all the countries suffering from energy poverty. And finally, every single one of us in this room is an energy consumer, and that means we all have a role to play regardless of our next steps in life. And for us, that means teaching renewable energy. It's actually possible to have an entire generation who thinks that renewable energy is business as usual. Why wouldn't we aim for that? We also ourselves can choose different forms of distributed energy. Whether you're in Europe or Africa or the United States, there's all sorts of options, including things like community choice aggregation that allow us to be more conscientious consumers of our kind of energy and can choose it close to home. And then lastly, it's this orientation to democratize power. The sort of high note to end on is that this is the beginning of a whole new way of looking at energy. And we are looking at a future where consumers can also be producers of energy. And we can look at a whole new system where, in fact, no one's reliant on a centralized infrastructure anymore. But we have the power ourselves to deliver power for all. So those are my remarks for this morning. Carlos, I hope I did a good job of being a little bit exciting. And I don't know if you want me to just hop off the stage or potentially take a few questions.
Yes, maybe a few questions.
Okay, a few questions. Thank you.